the middle game. I know it's very annoying. It's not easy for you to play in the middle game because in the opening everything is clear, right? Just develop pieces, control the center, castle. Everything is stated. That's what you need to do. Just do that and you are more or less fine. In general, you're okay. But many games I decided in the middle game. So how do we play the best way there? Because then it's not that clear, right? Like, what do I do? Do I attack? Do I defend? Do I create a weakness? Do I trade pieces? What do we do in the middle game? Can anyone tell me in one sentence what's the plan in the middle game? It's not clear, right? It's not so easy. So also I know for first hand from many students that it's hard for them. Like they struggle with the middle game. They develop pieces fine, and then once they get there, they don't know what to do. So that's like a super common question. What do I do in the middle game? I know the opening, I'm fine, but once I get there, what do I do? So in this video, we're going to talk about that, how to play in the middle game. I'm going to tell you principles, ideas, tips. Basically, these are 10 principles to play better in the middle game. Let's talk about that. So the first principle I want to highlight is going to be attack on a wing, react in the center. So let me tell you what this is about. Let me drink some water really quickly. In the middle game, very often there will be an attack on a wing on a side of the board. So this means that in this example, let's take this position. Black can play here h5. This is taken from an English opening, an opening that I really like. So let's say we play English, and at some point, getting out of the opening, starting the middle game, your opponent plays the move h5. So here there is a clear intention of an attack on the side of the board. Whenever there is an attack on the side of the board, you should react in the center. So this is the principle. Attack on the side, reaction in the center. If you do that, in general, the attack is going to be over. There won't be a really good or strong attack, and you're going to be fine in the position. That's it. Why is that? Well, for some reasons. First of all, to succeed in an attack, you must control the center. So if you react in a way that you get the control in the center, in general, according to principles, his attack should be over. So that's one thing. The other thing is, if he's attacking on a side, but then you react on another side, you're like distracting the focus of the position. So very often, that's another reason to make his attack fail in general. So, according to this analysis, if your opponent plays the move h5 with a clear intention of attacking on the king side, they have the rook, they have the bishop, they have the other bishop, they have the knight coming, maybe the queen coming later. So they have a clear intention. This is dangerous. If you're not careful, this is dangerous. So what do we play here? According to the principle, attack on the side, reaction in the center, we should react in the center with the move d4. This is the best move in the position. This move makes the position totally okay for white, and it's the move we should play here. Keep that principle in mind. It's going to help you a lot in many middle game positions. Principle number 2. Don't trade pieces with development advantage. Let's talk about this. If you're ahead in development, you are already castled. Your pieces are more active, your pieces are just better. In that situation, you don't trade pieces. It's actually very clear once you understand the idea, once you understand the way the game goes. It's clear that you should not trade because your pieces are better. Why would you trade, right? You are not supposed to trade. You are supposed to take advantage of your activity. So, for example, open new lines, be aggressive, target weaknesses, threaten things, take the initiative. There are a lot of things you can do instead of trading pieces. Trading pieces is the opposite to all those things I just mentioned. So that's principle number 2. If you are ahead in development, then don't trade pieces. Let's go to principle number 3. And this time I'm going to talk about don't play unnecessary pawn moves. And also here I'm talking, like, especially I'm talking about the pawns in front of your king, but not only about those pawns. So what's the problem with the pawns? The pawn is the only piece that cannot go back. So once you move the pawn, you know for sure that that pawn will never be able to go back to the previous position. For sure, it won't happen. So this is the idea. Every time you're moving a pawn, you must be sure that it's a good thing for you. Every time you move a pawn, you must be 100% sure that it's a move you need to play, because you won't be able to go back with that pawn, as I was saying. So again, pawn moves should be thoroughly thought. And here I'm also talking about the pawns in front of your king, because very often we think that, for some reason, we think that when we move these pawns in front of your king, you are making things better. That happens a lot. It's a very common mistake. And it's not really like that, right? The rule states do not move pawns in front of your king unless totally essential, totally necessary, unless it's a position you have studied, and you know that's the best thing. But in general, that's like not going to happen. In general, that's not the best thing. That's like an exception. If you move a pawn and that improves your position, that's like an exception. It's going to work more often that you don't move the pawn and you're going to be fine. That's the idea. So that's principle number 3 for the middle game. Don't play unnecessary pawn moves. Only the really essential pawn moves, only the ones you're totally sure, then you play those moves. I'm going to talk about principle number 4, and it is spot and attack your opponent's weaknesses. We're going to work with this position, so take a look at it so you get familiar with it. Well, about this position here, and about this principle number 4, spot and attack your opponent's weaknesses. What is this about? Well, in some positions your opponent is going to have a weakness, either because you created the weakness, you made him create the weakness, or because he voluntarily made a mistake and he created the weakness. So there will be a weakness in some positions, and if your opponent has a weakness, you should attack that weakness. So this principle is about your opponent having a weakness. If you don't attack it, it's like he doesn't have any problem. It's like he's fine. The weakness does not exist. So if your opponent has a weakness, you should attack it. That's where you are creating problems. That's where you are taking advantage of the weakness. So that's like principle number 4. Spot and attack your opponent's weaknesses. Here I'm talking about this pawn in the position that we have on the board. I'm talking about the pawn on d6. This pawn is a backward pawn, or you can also say it's a pawn left behind. As you can see, they don't have a pawn defending that pawn. This means, guys, that if you attack the pawn with pieces, he will be forced to defend it with pieces. They don't have a pawn there. And the pawn is also on a half open file, so there will be pressure. It's very easy for white to put pressure there. So that's the idea. If you find a weakness in your opponent's position, you should attack it. So you slave his pieces. In that way, your pieces are active and his pieces are passive. That gives you freedom, that gives you advantage, that gives you activity and everything, and that gives you, in general, a better position. So don't forget that. Spot weaknesses and attack those weaknesses. Let's talk about principle number 5. This is actually very simple, but it's also a very common mistake, so that's why I'm going to highlight it. But it's actually super simple, and it is about rooks belong to open and half open files. Immediately when we start the middle game, your major pieces are going to be activated. That's the idea. Almost always, in almost every middle game. Once you get there, you need to activate your major pieces. In the opening, we don't activate major pieces. In the opening, we activate minor pieces, knights and bishop. Well, the middle game is for major pieces. Of course, you can also improve your minor pieces. So I'm not saying we don't need to do that. Basically, in the middle game, you're going to improve the pieces. That's the plan, right? Improve your pieces as much as possible. And also, we are talking about the major pieces because they are going to be undeveloped. So if we talk about improvement, for sure, developing those pieces is going to be an improvement. So open and half open files for your rooks. That's the idea. Let's use the position, right, to get everything clearer. Basically, this is an open file. So either, both white and black should fight for that open file. They should bring rooks to the d file, for sure. That's an idea here in the position. Just looking at the position, we see the open file, rooks should go there. Also, we can highlight B file is half open for black. Black should bring a rook to that file, if possible. And E file is also half open for white. White should bring a rook to that file. That's it. Once you get into the middle game, bring your rooks to half open files or open files. So that's the way you activate your rooks. Keep it in mind, it's going to help you for sure. It happens basically in every middle game that you need to do this. I'm going to talk about principle number 6, and it is going to be about apply simplification theory. What is simplification theory? Once you have material advantage, you simplify the position, and you're going to win the game very easily, very often, right? So the idea is that if you get the minimum material advantage, for example, you get an extra pawn, that's probably enough to win the game in many cases, in many positions. So the rule states if you have one extra pawn, you can already simplify the position and try to win in the endgame. Of course, you might be thinking, I don't know anything about endgames. I'm not going to get into an endgame with an extra pawn because I don't know how to win that. But let me tell you something. I'm going to tell you two things. One thing is study a little that kind of endgames because it's going to help you improve a lot, right? So if you learn how to win endgames with an extra pawn, then you know you get a pawn in the middle game, you get there and you win. You get there to the endgame, So that's one thing, but the other thing I can tell you is even if you know nothing about endgames, you are more likely to win an endgame with an extra pawn than a middle game with an extra pawn. So in general, that's a nice rule. Apply simplification theory. If you get material advantage, simplify and try to win in the endgame. And also remember, here we're talking about pawn. That complicates everything. But very often you will have an extra piece or an extra rook, and then it's going to be very easy to win in the endgame. So keep that in mind. Apply simplification theory whenever you get material advantage. Here is an example. It is white to move here. What do you play in this position? Hint. Take a look at the material. Here we have an extra pawn. You have an extra pawn. What do? You simplify. The best move in this position for white, do you know which is? It's going to be queen takes queen. You don't like it? Well, that's the best one. You need to play queen takes queen here, and then of course this is an open file. Principle we studied a little earlier. Fight for the open file. Play rook d1. So keep that in mind here. In this position, as we have an extra pawn, the right plan is simplification. Trade queens, trade rooks later, trade minor pieces, activate them, but try to trade them, and if you get into the endgame, you should win with an extra pawn. I'm going to talk about principle number, I believe is number 7, I could say, and it is trade pieces to reduce an enemy attack. So whenever your opponent is attacking, he's creating problems, he has activity, he has been creating a lot of danger. Well, in those positions, a very useful technique is going to be simplify the position to reduce the attack. If he doesn't have pieces, then he won't be able to attack. That's the idea. So a way to get rid of a strong attack is by trading pieces, by simplifying, and this is going to help you so you can survive the dangerous attack your opponent is trying to create. In this position here, it is white to move. Can you think of a good move for white? Observe the activity, right? They have a bishop, also they have a bishop, but also they have the rook, the queen, the two knights, so clearly they have activity. Clearly they are aggressive, and clearly they can create problems here. They are attacking. How do you reduce the attack? How do you get rid of this attack? Well, according to the principle I just mentioned, you can trade pieces in the middle game to get rid of an enemy attack. So we can play the move here, queen g4, and if you're able to trade queens, this is going to be very good for you. Even if your opponent doesn't trade queen, for example, they can try, I don't know, queen a6 or something. The fact that you activated your queen, that you're threatening some things over there, and that you're defending a little better is going to be helpful. So when you offer trade and your opponent has to avoid the trade by playing something, escaping from that confrontation, very often it's going to be a good thing for you because you just activated one piece and he just ran somewhere escaping from that trade. But not necessarily he played a move improving his position. Very often he's just playing a move that he doesn't want to play, but he had to play it to avoid the trade. So that's principle number 7. Trade pieces to reduce an enemy attack. It's going to be important. Don't forget it. I'm going to talk about principle number 8, and it is be aggressive. There's a very common chess quote, and it is the player with the advantage must attack, or they will lose the advantage. Something like that. So the idea is that if you have the advantage, if you can be aggressive, if you can attack, if you can start some kind of action, and you don't, then you're going to lose the advantage. Precisely the advantage is that you can attack, that you can be aggressive. So you need to use it. You need to exploit it. So I'm going to say it again so it gets clearer. The player with the advantage must attack, or you can lose that advantage. Keep it in mind. The principle number 8 is be aggressive, right? So that's the idea. If you can be aggressive in the position, you should be aggressive and you should attack, otherwise you can lose your advantage. Here we have an example. In this position it is white to move, and well, before I tell you the moves for white here, take a look at the position, right? Super good. White is much better, more space. But also look at the activity. You have pressure, you have good pieces over there. Also look at this bishop. So generally it's a nice position. Black pieces are restricted. They are also passive. So it's a very tough position here for black. Well, let me tell you what happens. In this position, according to the engine, the 3 best moves for white are: number 1, bishop takes h6. Sacrifice the bishop for 2 pawns because a very strong attack is coming after that, and the enemy king is very discovered. Move number 2 is going to be the move g4. Super aggressive. You want to bring the rook, you want to break, and you're still playing bishop h6 at some point. So g4, also super aggressive. Move number 3, according to engines, rook g1. Same ideas. You're still playing g4, you're still playing bishop takes h6. So what does this mean? The 3 moves by the engine here are bishop h6, g4, and rook g1. Super aggressive moves. That's basically the principle. Be aggressive. If you have the advantage, then you need to use it. Keep it in mind, because if you don't use it, the opponent is going to get rid of that tough situation. They will have some advantage later, and probably they won't give you the opportunity to survive. Keep it in mind, be aggressive in your games. Principle number 9, and it is lift your rooks over the 3rd rank. This is very important, and you can use it very often in your games, especially when you're trying to attack the enemy king. You need to bring as many pieces as possible. And sometimes it's not easy to bring the rooks because they are, very far. It takes many moves sometimes, and it's not clear. Well, there's something we call lift the rook over the 3rd rank. It's a very typical maneuver, and with this maneuver, your rook is attacking like this, really quickly. It's there with you, helping, putting pressure. It's a very powerful piece, right? The rook is super powerful. So this is an example, super nice example, because it's creative, I could say. So it is white to move here. Look at the position. What do you play in a situation like this one? Well, in this position, we want to attack clearly. We have the bishop, we have the queen, we have a lot of space and control in the center. So it could be great if you could bring a rook, right, to the attack. We can do that. We can lift the rook over the 3rd rank. How do we do that? We have this amazing move, rook to a3. The rook goes from here to here, and it's almost decisive in the attack. So you can play the move rook a3 here, and you have really nice threats. I'm going to tell you the threats now, but also keep in mind the maneuver, right? It's the most important thing, how you can bring the rook to the attack. Sometimes you can also bring it from f. It happens a lot and more often, but I guess it's easier to see when we have this option. I just found this idea a little more creative, a little more original, but also very useful and more or less typical. So basically when you play rook a3, you're threatening mating 2 moves. Let's say they play, I don't know, queen here, thinking that if I play rook there, they still have h6. So they might think, I'm fine, no problem, I can defend here. He's doing useless threats here, nothing to worry about. Well, surprise, here is white to move. White has mating 2, queen sacrifice, and then rook h3. The pawn guards here, the bishop guards here, and of course the rook is decisive on the h file. So keep that in mind. You can create many problems if you can lift the rook over the third rank. It can help you a lot in the attack. So lift your rooks over the third rank when you're planning an attack in the middle game. And finally, principle number 10 is simple but important, and a lot of players are not aware of it. So I'm going to say it. Capture toward the center. So whenever you have two ways to capture with two different pawns, just capture from the edge toward the center. This is in general the right way to capture or to recapture. So for example, in this position, black plays bishop takes bishop. What do we play? From the edge toward the center. In that way, you bring pawns to the center, right? So you control more central squares. That's what you want to do. So in this position, a takes b3 is perfect. I mean, also you're opening the file, but in general, the rule is bring pawns toward the center. This is going to be good for your position. So keep it in mind, whenever you can capture with two pawns, that's the right way to capture. Also, in some positions, we have the same case over here. Again, from the edge toward the center is going to be right most of the time. In some positions, you can capture away from the center for some specific reason, like you think you can create too many problems with the rook on the file, or you need the rook for the attack, or I don't know. For some reason, you can do it, of course, but again, in general, more often, it's going to work from the edge toward the center is going to be correct. So keep it in mind, capture toward the center, that's the way we do it when we can capture with two different pawns. So these are my 10 principles to play in the middle game. I hope you find them useful. Remember to like the video if they are actually helpful. Also, let me know in the comments your opinion, if there was some principle that you found particularly useful, or maybe some principle here that you think is not really that great, or if you have a new principle, anything, feel free to write it in the comments. I'm happy to read and interact. I think we're about to finish here. Thank you so much, guys, for watching. Take care. I catch you guys in the next.